Thank you for taking the time to watch this episode of Life Support. If you enjoy the content, we would ask that you like it, hit subscribe, and share it with your friends. Hey, it's really great to have you on Life Support. What we do on this program is we tell stories to help you find a deeper relationship with Jesus through suffering and trauma. And it's a unique show, but we think it's important because so often Jesus shows up when we are at our lowest points in life. And a man that's familiar with dealing with folks that are struggling a little bit in different areas of life is our guest, Roy Yanke, and he is the executive director of PIR Ministries. Roy, welcome. Great to have you here.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. It's good to be with you all.
So what is PIR Ministries?
Yeah, Paul, it's an acronym for Pastor in Residence. That's the core process that our ministry was built around over 25 years ago. And so we got tired of trying to explain what that meant and just shortened it up to PIR. And it's a really great ministry that serves a segment of the church's life that often gets overlooked.
So how did you get interested in ministering to pastors?
So I pastored myself for 17 years and came into ministry with, as most of us do, some baggage that I had not dealt with. And as time went on in my ministry life, that baggage got heavier and heavier, and had a major crash and burn myself. So experienced an exit from ministry. That affected my family as well. And so the low point that you talked about at the beginning, the introduction of this, really hit hard for us. So let me explain it this way, give you the Reader's Digest version, okay? So I brought a lot of stuff into my ministry unresolved from my family, things revolving around sexuality. Had an experience in the church where that couldn't really be talked about in any significant way. I think that generation of churchgoers back when I was coming to the Lord, it's pretty obvious that you didn't talk about those things. You just didn't do them. So it became very easy for me to hide the things that I was involved with. It eventually led me to rob 13 banks because I was acting out significantly and had developed such a great amount of debt that no one knew about. So in total sin management mode, I stepped off the rails completely. And after the 13th one, the Lord said in his severe mercy, we've done it your way long enough. Now we're going to do it mine. And so I ended up in federal prison for 7 years. And when you talked about where Jesus meets us in our suffering, that is where Jesus met me in a brand new and significant way. And so he brought into my life some people who could really help me unpack and understand the dynamics of what I was dealing with, really begin to take responsibility for my stuff. And the Lord brought some great healing into my life at that point in time. And
thank you for being so open and honest about that, because that does help give context to why you are concerned for pastors who are in ministry. And I know as a pastor, there's not very many people that you can really talk to. Congregants go to community groups, which is great, and I'm in a community group. When it comes around to how are you really doing, you can't say, because it just isn't appropriate with people that you're shepherding, and it's not that you're trying to hide, it's just not appropriate. And so every now and then you run into a fellow pastor that you can really let your hair down with. What do you see as the most common things that pastors are struggling with? What kind of things come across your desk, so to speak?
Yeah, so the isolation piece is huge. whether it's geographical or emotional or spiritual. Pastors tend to not have friends. Now, again, I think that's changing a bit. It is a generational thing, I think, for those of us who are older. But in the younger crew, there's a little more understanding and emphasis on the friendship piece. But the isolation is huge. And that's such a breeding ground in a lot of people's lives for things that can take you off the rails.
Mm-hmm.
Overextending, not understanding our limits as human beings, that's a huge piece. So that leads to burnout, where you're just extending yourself beyond what you should in ministry and not taking care of your own soul. We see pastors dealing a lot with conflict and not understanding how to deal with conflict, not having been mentored in conflict navigation and management. So those are really big pieces, especially right now, that we see.
Yeah, I can relate to that. There are mornings when I wake up and my schedule is full of meetings that I don't really want to go to and people I really don't want to meet with. And it seems like it kind of goes on and on. And it can be, and I think as someone who really, most pastors really want to fulfill their calling. They're very serious about it. And it eats at them when they feel these kind of feelings. Like maybe it's anger towards someone or feeling like, I don't like working at this church. How could I possibly even think those thoughts? And so what does a pastor do when they start to find themselves beginning that process of spiraling?
I think self-awareness is a huge piece. So you have to know what the warning signs are and pay attention to those. And when they begin to happen, then you definitely need to be reaching out to someone or someones. There are a lot of good ways to do that. If you have a friend, if you have a coach, a mentor, spiritual director, any of those kinds of people that you can reach out to and say, hey, you know what? Kind of seeing these things beginning to happen. These thoughts are beginning to recur for me. I think I need to take a pause here and think about this and figure out some good strategies going forward.
And here's the other thing I think that a lot of guys struggle with, and I just say guys because that's my sphere. I'm sure women have a completely other way of dealing with these things, but probably experience similar thoughts and so forth. But I can't even really talk to my wife because there are things happening in the church that I'm dealing with that I don't want her to come to church and look around and go like, I hate all these people. I want her to have joy. And so I just kind of carry it, Is that pretty common for pastors to feel that way?
Oh, yeah, it's super common. And I have become a fan of trying to deal with that idea with pastors that your spouse has to be protected. I'm not entirely sure that that's the best way. Every situation is unique, so you can't just slap a generalization on that.
Yeah.
But I do think that the challenges and the pain of ministry life is better shared. And if you are careful to guard each other's hearts in that and know that even in the midst of all the struggles, to help each other find the joys, then you're not walking into a situation where you're looking, scant-eyed at people and wondering what they're thinking and all the rest. So there are certain things, obviously, where, there may be sensitive issues that you wouldn't share, but overall, the struggles, the challenges, the blessings of ministry life, I think it needs to be shared.
Yeah, that's good counsel. Roy Yanke is our guest, and he is in the pastor restoration business, and so we're just kind of mulling through here. And I do want to get in a few minutes to how churches can minister to pastors. And unfortunately, you have a pastor talking to you, so you get to hear all of my issues here in this little counseling session. Another thing I think is common for pastors, they really want to preach well. They really want to be good communicators. They spend time mulling over what they're saying. They spend time writing. They're very, at least the men that I have been with are very serious, but they rarely get feedback unless it's negative. And so you go home on a Monday or even a Sunday evening, and somebody will say, well, how did it go? I don't know. I have no way of knowing. And that gets to be very, very difficult because you care so much. And then it just sort of lands and everybody just goes to lunch and you're left kind of standing there. How does a pastor, Roy, kind of begin to balance what his expectations are for the effect of his ministry?
Well, there are so many dimensions to that. So on the pastoral side, the person themselves, I think without being like super spiritual here, I do think it's a reality that we have to take our cue from Jesus. And I think if you look at his ministry, obviously not all of the feedback was good.
Yeah.
And so, you're in good stead when you're walking as a disciple and following in his path, even as a pastor. And that's important. I think that for me and for those that we counsel, the idea of that the words you're delivering, as long as you understand it's done in the context of the audience of one, which is God himself, that you're faithful in delivering what he has given to you, that can be important. But then I think the flip side of that is a pastor can invite people, select people, if you will, to give feedback, to share, how did this impact your life? Not whether I, didn't stutter or had too many uhs and all the rest of that, right. But how do you see this impacting your life? Where do you see the connecting points? And I think those in the congregation can be supportive of their pastors in that way. They can give honest feedback, not just, boy, that really sucked. So,
Yeah.
But this is how God is speaking to me through that. I see this one particular point that really resonated.
Yeah, and that's what we do with the young pastors that we're developing. We do exactly that. We hear them preach, and then let's talk for a few minutes about what I heard, and I guess why not bring congregations into that and be a part of it? But like you said, be careful about the people so that you can trust them, and then be willing and humble enough to really hear what they're saying, because none of us have this thing down, at least from what I can tell.
No, I haven't certainly arrived at that.
What about soul care for pastors, Roy? Like, so busy, tremendous amount of pressure, and even saying those words, I feel guilty. Like somehow we have this really specially hard job when I've got guys in my church who are working 12 hours a day, and they've got their own pressures. But how does a pastor take care of himself or herself when these demands just keep coming at you?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is to understand that, and I think people in the pew need to hear this as well, that ministry life is different. There is a dimension to that is wholly different than if I'm working even 12 hours on the assembly line, and I've done that. The emotional and spiritual weight of caring for a congregation, even the Apostle Paul in Corinthians talks about this in his own experience. There's eternal significance to what we're doing, and you're dealing with creatures who have an eternal dimension to their lives. And so it's totally different. And so the weight can get, if you are thinking about that and you're conscientious about it, you can really feel that deeply. So pastors need to acknowledge that, congregants need to acknowledge that. But then as far as personal soul care, I think it's very, very important that pastors and ministry leaders begin with the idea that they themselves are disciples before they were ever called into a ministry vocation. They still have to sit at the feet of Jesus every day. They have to be immersed in the gospel for them every day, not just what they preach on a Sunday, and be growing in that, in the confidence and the love of Christ for them. And then there are other disciplines, that can be brought into it. I usually refer to them as rhythms. Most people resonate with disciplines, but the rhythms of Sabbath, rest. Every pastor, every ministry leader should take a day that isn't just a day to recoup, but a day to actually rest and to let go, in the context of, God has been running the universe long before I arrived on the scene. I'm sure you can handle it today, Yeah. So that's critical. And other rhythms of silence and solitude and the rhythm of breaking that isolation through community and connection for yourself. Those are huge pieces. And that you cannot, I'm sure everyone has heard this, you cannot give away what you don't have. And if your soul is not tethered well to Jesus, to the gospel, then ministry life can break you and turn you upside down.
Yeah, I've discovered in my own life, I've been fortunate to have mentors that have helped me. And I look forward to that time in the mornings when I can and you're right, like preaching and having your own time with Jesus are two completely different things. They're somewhat intertwined, but if a pastor thinks that preparing for a sermon is going to get him through, then that's not going to work, because you have to listen to what God is saying to you as well. How has COVID affected pastors from what you can tell?
Every challenge that pastors faced before has been put on steroids. It has impacted them greatly. Barna just put out a report back in November where they noted about 39% of pastors are considering leaving the ministry. I think that's ramped up a little bit, even to 45% in recent months. They're keeping a pretty close pulse on that thing. The pastors that we coach, 2 out of 3 pastors have seriously considered, this is not for me anymore. I want to step out and do something else. So it's had a huge impact. No matter where a pastor lands in the last 2 years, he's wrong.
Very true. Very true.
So it's really been a no-win situation for most pastors. And you begin to wonder, is this worth it? And many are asking that question.
Well, in all the things you've learned, many of the strategies you've learned, the rhythms of church life that you've become, through experience, good at being able to handle, they're out the window, and you're dealing with things you never ever thought you'd see coming down the road. And then there's a disappointment you feel toward how people are acting, and it's just a weird time, I think.
Truly is. Yeah. How many pastors have had to become technical experts in this context, getting stuff online and all the rest. So yeah, absolutely.
So how can a church, I mean, this is too broad a question, but somebody listening right now saying, well, I love my pastor. How can they help their pastor?
They can be an advocate for them. So when others want to criticize, they can be the champion and the advocate. They can make known their love in practical ways. They can provide encouragement, like we were talking about before, giving the feedback on the sermon, treating them as a human being and not just somebody special up there talking on Sunday morning, that they have needs and issues at family and all the rest, and just know that and treat them that way is really important. My pastor, who is now pastoring in a different location, just talked a lot about that, about how important it was for us who were in leadership in the church to just treat them, he and his wife, both as human beings, and then provide some very practical things, giving them opportunities to get away that were apart from vacations, just little things, a day away, a bed and breakfast night, whatever it may be. Those kinds of things really do become, they strengthen a pastor and their family in ways that people don't understand.
Yeah, I think that feeds hope into you. And the other thing I wouldn't underestimate is prayer. People always think, well, prayer is kind of the last thing I can do. Prayer is so important. When someone comes up to me and when they mean it, and they say, how are you? I've been praying for you. Is there, and this is when I know they're serious, is when they say, is there something that really specific that I can pray for you about this week? That means a lot to know there are people, because this is a spiritual war we're fighting here, right? And you need other people to fight with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly I would not put that at the end of that list that I just gave. It's first and foremost. And I agree with you that it needs to be that specific and that intentional.
A friend of mine once termed ministry as stirring the soup of souls. And I've always really liked that definition because it is that kind of just constant kind of grinding away and fighting off the enemy and trying not to see people in a bad light, because they're just like me. We're all sinners. We're trying to fight our way through this broken world, and I'm sure I'm my own worst enemy at times, which is why what you're doing is really, really important because no matter how long you've been in ministry, and I've been in ministry now about 1,000 years, no matter how long you've been in ministry, you're still a person. You still get hurt. You still struggle with your own feelings. You get frustrated, you get disappointed in yourself. So how can someone get in touch with you, Roy, if they're struggling, if even if their pastor might be struggling and they want to just make an inquiry, how do we get a hold of you?
Sure. So we're on the web. They can look for PIR Ministries. It's pirministries.org. And that's a good way to find out more about us. And there's a contact page there that they can fill out and gets to us immediately. And we follow up with those immediately. Certainly, they can email me directly if they're interested. And I certainly wouldn't mind that at all. So it's roy@pirministries.org. So those are the key ways to get in touch with us. We do have a Facebook page as well. People are interested in that. As well as LinkedIn. So we have a presence out there on the media, in the internet, and people can touch base with us that way, or like I said, email me directly.
Okay. Yeah, we so much appreciate your time, and I appreciate your openness and your willingness to share your own story. We'll have you back. I have a few more questions for you and things I want to mull over with you, but thanks so much for being with us today, Roy. I really appreciate that.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks for all you're doing. I appreciate it.